Who are you?" repeated Allan. "I humbly beg your pardon, sir," faltered the stranger, stepping back again confusedly. "The servants told me I should find Mr. Armadale." "What, are you Mr. Bashwood?" "Yes, if you please, sir." "I beg your pardon for speaking to you so roughly," said Allan; "but the fact is, you rather startled me. My name is Armadale. Put on your hat, pray. And this is my friend, Mr. Midwinter, who wants your help in the steward's office." "We hardly stand in need of an introduction," said Midwinter. "I met Mr. Bashwood out walking a few days since, and he was kind enough to direct me when I had lost my way." "Put on your hat," reiterated Allan, as Mr. Bashwood, still bareheaded, stood bowing speechlessly, now to one of the young men, and now to the other. "My good sir, put on your hat, and let me show you the way back to the house. Excuse me for noticing it," added Allan, as the man, in sheer nervous helplessness, let his hat fall, instead of putting it back on his head, "but you seem a little out of sorts. A glass of good wine will do you no harm before you and my friend come to business. Whereabouts did you meet with Mr. Bashwood, Midwinter, when you lost your way?" "I am too ignorant of the neighborhood to know. I must refer you to Mr. Bashwood." "Come, tell us where it was," said Allan, trying, a little too abruptly, to set the man at his ease, as they all three walked back to the house. The measure of Mr. Bashwood's constitutional timidity seemed to be filled to the brim by the loudness of Allan's voice, and the bluntness of Allan's request. He ran over in the same feeble flow of words with which he had deluged Midwinter on the occasion when they first met. "It was on the road, sir," he began, addressing himself alternately to Allan, whom he called "sir," and to Midwinter, whom he called by his name. "I mean, if you please, on the road to Little Gilbeck. A singular name, Mr. Midwinter, and a singular place. I don't mean the village, I mean the neighborhood. I mean the Broads, beyond the neighborhood. Perhaps you may have heard of the Norfolk Broads, sir. What they call lakes in other parts of England they call Broads here. The Broads are quite numerous. I think they would repay a visit. You would have seen the first of them, Mr. Midwinter, if you had walked on a few miles from where I had the honor of meeting you. Remarkably numerous, the Broads, sir, situated between this and the sea. About 3 miles from the sea, Mr. Midwinter. About 3 miles. Mostly shallow, sir, with rivers running between them. Beautiful, solitary, quite a watery country, Mr. Midwinter. Quite separate, as it were, in itself. Parties sometimes visit them, sir. Pleasure parties in boats. It's quite a little network of lakes, or perhaps more correctly, pools. There is good sport in the cold weather. The wild fowl are quite numerous. Yes, the Broads would repay a visit, Mr. Midwinter, the next time you are walking that way. The distance from here to Little Gilbeck, and then from Little Gilbeck to Girdler Broad, which is the first you come to, is altogether not more..." In sheer nervous inability to leave off, he would apparently have gone on talking of the Norfolk Broads for the rest of the evening, if one of his two listeners had not unceremoniously cut him short before he could find his way into a new sentence. "Are the Broads within an easy day's drive there and back from this house?" asked Allan, feeling, if they were, that the place for the picnic was discovered already. "Oh, yes, sir, a nice drive. Quite a nice easy drive from this beautiful place." They were by this time ascending the portico steps, Allan leading the way up, and calling to Midwinter and Mr. Bashwood to follow him into the library, where there was a lighted lamp. In the interval which elapsed before the wine made its appearance, Midwinter looked at his chance acquaintance of the highroad with strangely mingled feelings of compassion and distrust. Of compassion that strengthened in spite of him, of distrust that persisted in diminishing, try as he might to encourage it to grow. There, perched comfortless on the edge of his chair, sat the poor broken down nervous wretch, in his worn black garments, with his watery eyes, his honest old outspoken wig, his miserable mohair stalk, and his false teeth that were incapable of deceiving anybody. There he sat, politely ill at ease, now shrinking in the glare of the lamp, now wincing under the shock of Allan's sturdy voice, a man with the wrinkles of 60 years in his face, and the manners of a child in the presence of strangers. An object of pity, surely, if ever there was a pitiable object yet. "Whatever else you're afraid of, Mr. Bashwood," cried Allan, pouring out a glass of wine, "don't be afraid of that. There isn't a headache in a hogshead of it. Make yourself comfortable. I'll leave you and Mr. Midwinter to talk your business over by yourselves. It's all in Mr. Midwinter's hands. He acts for me, and settles everything at his own discretion." He said those words with a cautious choice of expression very uncharacteristic of him, and without further explanation made abruptly for the door. Midwinter, sitting near it, noticed his face as he went out. Easy as the way was into Allan's favour, Mr. Bashwood, beyond all kind of doubt, had, in some unaccountable manner, failed to find it. The two strangely assorted companions were left together, parted widely, as it seemed on the surface, from any possible interchange of sympathy, drawn invisibly one to the other, nevertheless, by those magnetic similarities of temperament which overleap all difference of age or station, and defy all apparent incongruities of mind and character. From the moment when Allan left the room, the hidden influence that works in darkness began slowly to draw the two men together across the great social desert which had lain between them up to this day. Midwinter was the first to approach the subject of the interview. "May I ask," he began, "if you have been made acquainted with my position here, and if you know why it is that I require your assistance?" Mr. Bashwood, still hesitating and still timid, but manifestly relieved by Allan's departure, sat further back in his chair, and ventured on fortifying himself with a modest little sip of wine. "Yes, sir," he replied. "Mr. Pedgift informed me of all. At least I think I may say so, of all the circumstances. I am to instruct, or perhaps I ought to say to advise. No, Mr. Bashwood, the first word was the best word of the two. I am quite ignorant of the duties which Mr. Armadale's kindness has induced him to entrust to me. If I understand right, there can be no question of your capacity to instruct me, for you once filled a steward's situation yourself. May I inquire where it was?" "At Sir John Mellowship's, sir, in West Norfolk. Perhaps you would like I have got it with me to see my testimonial? Sir John might have dealt more kindly with me, but I have no complaint to make. It's all done and over now." His watery eyes looked more watery still, and the trembling in his hands spread to his lips as he produced an old dingy letter from his pocket book and laid it open on the table. The testimonial was very briefly and very coldly expressed, but it was conclusive as far as it went. Sir John considered it only right to say that he had no complaint to make of any want of capacity or integrity in his steward. If Mr. Bashwood's domestic position had been compatible with the continued performance of his duties on the estate, Sir John would have been glad to keep him. As it was, embarrassments caused by the state of Mr. Bashwood's personal affairs had rendered it undesirable that he should continue in Sir John's service, and on that ground, and that only, his employer and he had parted. Such was Sir John's testimony to Mr. Bashwood's character. As Midwinter read the last lines, he thought of another testimonial, still in his own possession, of the written character which they had given him at the school, when they turned their sick usher adrift in the world. His superstition, distrusting all new events and all new faces at Thorpe Ambrose, still doubted the man before him as obstinately as ever. But when he now tried to put those doubts into words, his heart upbraided him, and he laid the letter on the table in silence. The sudden pause in the conversation appeared to startle Mr. Bashwood. He comforted himself with another little sip of wine, and, leaving the letter untouched, burst irrepressibly into words as if the silence was quite unendurable to him. "I am ready to answer any question, sir," he began. "Mr. Pedgift told me that I must answer questions, because I was applying for a place of trust. Mr. Pedgift said neither you nor Mr. Armadale was likely to think the testimonial sufficient of itself. Sir John doesn't say he might have put it more kindly, but I don't complain. Sir John doesn't say what the troubles were that lost me my place. perhaps